Welcome to CliffNote Chronicles. Today's audiobook is based on the book, Stop Worrying and Start Living. Have you ever lain awake at night, your mind racing with endless what-ifs? Have you ever found yourself replaying conversations, imagining disasters that never happened, or worrying so much about tomorrow that you could barely enjoy today? If you're nodding yes, you're not alone. Overthinking, anxiety, and constant worry have become daily companions for millions of people, quietly stealing our peace, draining our energy, and keeping us from living the lives we deserve. But here's the good news: there is a way out. For decades, Dale Carnegie's timeless classic, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, has helped people across the world break free from the prison of worry. In this audiobook, you'll discover practical strategies, proven mental habits, and powerful stories that will teach you how to stop letting fear run your life and start embracing each day with confidence and peace of mind. By listening, you will learn how to protect yourself from the destructive cycle of overthinking, how to handle criticism without losing sleep, how to keep your body strong so your mind stays calm, and how to find the kind of work and purpose that gives real happiness. You'll discover simple but life-changing techniques like living in day-tight compartments, analyzing problems with clarity, and cultivating a mindset that makes worry powerless against you. This is not just theory. These are real, usable tools you can start practicing right away to calm your mind, protect your health, and live with more joy and freedom than you may have thought possible. So, if you're ready to stop letting worry control your life, and instead step into a calmer, more confident, more fulfilling version of yourself, then let's begin this journey together. Part 1. Fundamental facts you should know about worry. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the edge of a great wide river, and the current is rushing in two directions at once, one pulling backward into the past with all its regrets, mistakes, and missed opportunities, and the other dragging you forward into the future, filled with unknown dangers, imagined tragedies, and fears of what may never come to pass. And in the middle of this pull stands your present life, your one single moment of living, which can so easily be swept away if you do not learn how to anchor yourself. And it is precisely this central truth that Dale Carnegie begins with when he opens his book on how to stop worrying and start living. The first fundamental fact, one that might seem deceptively simple yet is enormously powerful, is the idea of living in what he calls day-tight compartments. This phrase means sealing off yesterday with all its burdens and mistakes, and closing the door on tomorrow with all its uncertainties and possibilities, so that your energy, your thoughts, and your emotions are not scattered thinly across time, but instead concentrated, focused, and fully engaged with the 24 hours of today. Think about how the compartments of a ship are designed: strong, watertight sections that prevent flooding from spreading throughout the vessel. And understand that your mind and your emotions need similar compartments, so that a regret from yesterday does not sink your spirits today, and a fear of tomorrow does not poison the peace you could experience in this moment. The second fundamental fact that Carnegie emphasizes is that worry, in and of itself, is wasted energy. Worry does not solve problems. It does not heal the past, nor does it guarantee control over the future. Instead, worry gnaws at your strength, steals your sleep, clouds your judgment, and distracts you from constructive action. He points out that if we could measure the cost of worry in hours lost, in health diminished, in relationships strained, in opportunities overlooked, we would be shocked at how expensive it truly is. This is why he insists that you must train your mind to recognize worry for what it is, an unproductive habit that can be replaced with deliberate thought, calm analysis, and purposeful action. From there, he introduces the third fundamental fact, which is the necessity of analyzing worry in a clear, structured way. He suggests a simple but transformative approach. Whenever a worry arises, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. What is the worst that can possibly happen? If the worst does happen, can I accept it, And once I have accepted it, what can I do to improve upon it? By forcing yourself to consider the absolute worst-case scenario, you strip worry of its endless vagueness and give it a defined shape. By practicing acceptance of even that worst outcome, you rob worry of its power to terrify you. And by turning your mind toward constructive steps that could lessen the impact, you transform nervous energy into purposeful motion. These fundamentals, living in day-tight compartments, recognizing worry as wasted energy, and adopting a method of constructive analysis, form the solid foundation of the book and, more importantly, the foundation of a calmer, saner, and more productive life. Carnegie reminds us that most of our suffering comes not from real, present difficulties, but from reliving the past or anticipating the future. The mind is restless, always leaping back or racing ahead, but peace is only possible when you take control of your focus, return it to the present, and put your energy where it can actually make a difference. I would pause here to let you, the listener, think of your own life. How often your mind wanders backward to replay some mistake, or leaps forward to rehearse some fear, and ask yourself how much joy, how much strength, how much precious time has been consumed by these endless mental rehearsals. Carnegie's wisdom, though written decades ago, is as urgent and applicable now as it was then, for the fundamentals of worry and the fundamentals of peace have not changed. To live in day-tight compartments, to stop giving worry the false dignity of your attention, and to practice structured thinking instead of aimless fretting. These are not just tips, they are life-saving disciplines. Part 2. How to break the worry habit before it breaks you. Breaking the worry habit is not about silencing every anxious thought, nor is it about pretending that life will unfold without challenges, disappointments, or obstacles. Rather, it is about reshaping the way you respond to the inevitable uncertainties of existence, about creating habits of thought that allow you to stand tall in the face of storms, and about replacing destructive cycles of fear with constructive cycles of courage. And Dale Carnegie, with his blend of plain-spoken wisdom and practical insight, lays out several fundamentals that serve as stepping stones for anyone ready to break free from worry's grip. The first fundamental he stresses is that worry thrives in the vague and the undefined. When our fears are hazy and ill-formed, when we do not take the time to examine them clearly, they grow like shadows in a dimly lit room, larger and more menacing than they truly are. Carnegie insists that one of the most effective ways to weaken worry is to drag it into the light of clear analysis. Define the problem in writing, describe it in plain terms, and ask yourself what exactly it is you are afraid of, for once a problem is named, it often shrinks in size, and once you can see it clearly, your mind shifts from frantic speculation to logical consideration. The second fundamental is the power of action as an antidote to worry. Worry feeds on inaction, it multiplies in idleness. The longer we sit still, spinning endless scenarios in our heads, the more entrenched our worry becomes. Action, even imperfect action, interrupts this cycle. Carnegie gives examples of people who, instead of waiting passively for fate to deliver its verdict, stepped forward, did what they could, and found that the very act of moving dissolved much of their anxiety. It is a principle as old as life itself. Energy channeled into forward motion leaves little room for fear to stagnate. He is reminding us that worry is often nothing more than unused energy begging for direction. And when you point that energy toward concrete tasks, you starve worry of its favorite food, your attention. The third fundamental in breaking the worry habit is acceptance of the inevitable. There are circumstances that no amount of resistance, denial, or resentment can change. The lost opportunity, the illness that cannot be reversed, the storm that is already broken. And yet, how often do we exhaust ourselves fighting realities we cannot alter? Carnegie says bluntly that peace begins where acceptance begins. To cooperate with the inevitable is not to surrender in weakness, but to acknowledge truth with dignity and to free up your energy for what still can be improved. The moment you stop wrestling with the immovable, you discover strength for the things you can influence. And in that redirection lies the first taste of genuine relief. The fourth fundamental is what he calls putting a stop-loss order on your worries. Borrowed from the language of finance, this principle means deciding in advance how much of your mental and emotional capital you are willing to spend on a particular issue. Just as a wise investor sets a limit to prevent catastrophic loss, so too must a wise individual decide that some concerns are not worth endless rumination, that after a certain point further worry is simply wasted expenditure. By setting boundaries on how much you will allow yourself to dwell on a problem, you conserve your energy for living rather than losing yourself in perpetual mental deficit. And finally, Carnegie urges us to remember the futility of sawing sawdust. This vivid metaphor captures the sheer absurdity of reliving the past, re-arguing decisions already made, and re-fighting battles long concluded. Sawdust cannot be re-sawn, and yet how many of us spend hours, days, even years chewing over mistakes, nursing old grievances, and reimagining what might have been. To break the worry habit means to stop giving life to what is already dead, to recognize that no amount of rumination can change yesterday, and that every moment spent sawing sawdust is a moment stolen from today's possibilities. Taken together, these fundamentals, defining problems clearly, turning worry into action, accepting the inevitable, setting limits on emotional expenditure, and abandoning the futility of reliving the past, form a practical and enduring system for dismantling worry piece by piece. They are not abstract theories, but lived strategies, drawn from stories of people who faced crises, personal struggles, and heavy burdens, and who discovered that worry, while powerful, is not invincible once you understand its weaknesses. I invite you to let these lessons settle in your mind. Picture your own life, the situations that gnaw at your peace, the moments where you sit frozen in thought, and imagine what would change if, instead of allowing worry to break you, you broke the habit first, by confronting vagueness with clarity, by drowning paralysis in action, by bowing gracefully to the inevitable, by refusing to overspend your emotional reserves, and by finally laying down the saw that cuts endlessly at dust. This is the path Carnegie lays out, a path that leads not only to freedom from worry, but also to a fuller embrace of life itself. Part 3. 7 Ways to Cultivate a Mental Attitude That Will Bring You Peace and Happiness. The first fundamental is filling your mind with thoughts of peace, courage, health, and hope. Carnegie draws on the timeless truth that the human mind cannot think two opposing thoughts at the same time. You cannot dwell on despair if you are actively cultivating hope, and you cannot fixate on weakness if you are filling yourself with images of strength. So he insists that you must deliberately feed your mind with the kinds of ideas, words, and pictures that reinforce a positive attitude. Just as the body becomes what it is fed, the mind too grows according to the nourishment it receives, and if you allow negative thoughts to dominate, worry and fear take root. But if you consciously choose uplifting material, surround yourself with encouraging voices, and rehearse words of courage, then the soil of your inner life becomes fertile ground for peace. The second fundamental is never trying to get even with your enemies. Carnegie explains that resentment, revenge, and the endless cycle of trying to pay back those who hurt us only keep wounds open, draining our energy and poisoning our minds. He reminds us that harboring anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer, and he challenges us to let go of the burden of hate, not for the sake of the other person, but for our own health, our own serenity, and our own ability to live unshackled. Forgiveness, or at the very least release, is a gift we give ourselves because it frees us from the chains of bitterness. The third fundamental is to expect ingratitude. Carnegie does not say this with bitterness, but with realism. Human beings are often self-absorbed, often forgetful, and often too caught up in their own struggles to remember to say thank you. So if you live your life expecting gratitude for every kind act, you will often feel slighted, resentful, and hurt. Instead, he counsels you to give without expectation, to do what is right because it is right, and to find joy in the act itself, not in the applause that may or may not follow. By lowering the burden of expectation, you also lower the likelihood of disappointment. The fourth fundamental is to count your blessings, not your troubles. This simple yet radical act of gratitude shifts the focus of your mind from what is lacking to what is present, from scarcity to abundance. Carnegie encourages us to make this a daily practice, to literally list out the things we have to be thankful for, whether great or small. Because once you start noticing what you already have, your perspective changes, your sense of contentment deepens, and your worries begin to shrink in proportion. Gratitude, practiced regularly, is one of the most powerful mental habits for peace. The fifth fundamental is to not imitate others. In a world that constantly compares, measures, and pressures us to conform, Carnegie reminds us that much of our worry stems from trying to live someone else's life or to compete in a race we were never meant to run. Peace comes from embracing your own uniqueness, recognizing that you are not meant to be a copy of anyone else, and cultivating your strengths instead of resenting your limitations. When you stop imitating and start appreciating your individuality, you also stop the constant cycle of comparison that breeds anxiety and discontent. The sixth fundamental is to profit from your losses. This does not mean pretending that failure does not sting, but rather approaching every setback as a teacher, every mistake as a lesson, and every difficulty as an opportunity to grow. Carnegie tells us that worry often clings to our failures because we see them as dead ends. But if we reframe them as detours, as moments of learning, then the sting lessens and the value rises. By turning loss into instruction, you turn worry into wisdom. And the seventh fundamental is to create happiness for others. Here lies one of Carnegie's deepest insights, that peace and happiness are not purely internal pursuits, but are amplified when directed outward. When you bring joy to another person, when you lighten their load, when you encourage their spirit, you find that your own heart is lifted. Worry thrives in isolation, but it withers in the presence of genuine connection and kindness. By cultivating the habit of contributing to the happiness of others, you create a cycle where your own joy is continually renewed. These 7 fundamentals together form a mental blueprint for peace. Filling your mind with positive nourishment, letting go of resentment, expecting less recognition, cultivating gratitude, embracing your uniqueness, learning from losses, and spreading happiness outward. Each is simple to understand, but each requires practice to master. And Carnegie's gift is in reminding us that mastery does not come in a day, but through the steady repetition of habits that gradually reshape the entire outlook of our minds. I would close this part by urging you to reflect. Which of these 7 speaks most to your current state? Which one could you begin practicing today? And how would your life look 6 months from now if you lived each day with even half of these fundamentals guiding your mind? Because in the end, worry does not vanish through magic. It fades when replaced with stronger, healthier, life-giving attitudes, cultivated day by day. Part 4. The Golden Rule for Conquering Worry. The golden rule for conquering worry is built on the principle of keeping your mind so constructively occupied with thoughts of service, creativity, and purpose that there remains little room for worry to grow. In other words, the cure for excessive self-concern is not more self-examination, but rather shifting your focus outward toward useful work, toward helping others, and toward engaging fully with the tasks that lie before you. Carnegie stresses that much of our worry is born from an inward turning of the mind, a constant circling around me, my fears, my future, my mistakes, my troubles. And he warns that this endless self-centered reflection is a breeding ground for anxiety. The golden rule teaches us that by reversing that focus, by investing our energy outward, we find not only relief from worry, but also a deeper sense of satisfaction. The first fundamental here is the realization that worry cannot survive in a mind that is constructively busy. Just as weeds cannot grow in a garden that is thoroughly tended, worry struggles to take root when our time is filled with meaningful effort. Carnegie is not advocating frantic activity or meaningless busyness, but purposeful work that channels nervous energy into creation, problem-solving, or acts of service. He illustrates that some of the most anxious people are those with too much idle time to sit and stew, while some of the most serene individuals are those who are fully engaged, body and mind, in worthwhile endeavors. The second fundamental is the practice of forgetting yourself by serving others. This echoes a timeless principle found in philosophy, religion, and psychology alike. When you take your eyes off your own burdens and instead lend your attention to easing the burdens of someone else, you discover a strange paradox. Your own load becomes lighter. Carnegie recounts the truth that some of the happiest people he encountered were not those with the fewest troubles, but those who made it their habit to create joy, comfort, or encouragement for others. And in doing so, they found their own worries shrank almost by accident. To conquer worry, then, is not to deny your troubles, but to redirect your energy into compassion and contribution. The third fundamental is learning to do every task, no matter how small, with your whole heart. Worry often enters when we split our minds, when half is on the present task and the other half is on some distant fear. By practicing the art of complete concentration, of pouring yourself fully into the moment, you crowd out the mental space that worry requires. Carnegie reminds us that even the smallest tasks, if approached with devotion and focus, can become anchors of peace because they train the mind to stay present rather than drift toward the unknown. The fourth fundamental is cultivating an attitude of giving rather than grasping. When worry takes over, it is almost always tied to what we fear losing: our money, our reputation, our security, our health. But when you shift from a posture of holding tight to a posture of giving freely, your relationship to life changes. You begin to see yourself not as someone constantly at risk of loss, but as someone always capable of offering value. In that act of giving, worry loosens its grip, because your worth is no longer tied only to what you possess, but to what you contribute. And finally, Carnegie emphasizes the overarching truth that peace comes not from avoiding responsibility, but from embracing it. Many people try to conquer worry by running away, by refusing to engage, by hiding from challenges, yet this only deepens anxiety, because avoidance breeds fear. The golden rule teaches us that when you step into responsibility, when you do what needs to be done wholeheartedly, you replace worry with courage, and in that act, you grow stronger than the very fear that once held you captive. So the golden rule, distilled to its essence, is this: lose yourself in purposeful work and service to others, and worry will lose its hold on you. It is not a quick fix, nor is it a once-and-for-all solution, but a daily discipline, a conscious choice to focus outward rather than spiral inward, to act instead of brood, to serve instead of stew. Carnegie's wisdom here is timeless because it reminds us that happiness and peace are not found in endlessly managing every detail of our own lives, but in giving ourselves away to something greater. I would pause here and invite you to picture your own day. The hours spent worrying about what might go wrong, the minutes consumed by replaying what already did, and then ask yourself, what if some of that time, even a fraction, were redirected toward helping a neighbor, creating something useful, finishing a task wholeheartedly, or simply giving attention to another human being? How much lighter might your own spirit feel, and how much weaker would worry's hold be upon you? That is the golden rule for conquering worry. and it is one of the most liberating truths in the entire book. Part 5. How to keep from worrying about criticism. The first fundamental he lays before us is the reality that unjust criticism is often a disguised compliment. Think about it. People rarely criticize those who are doing nothing, who are achieving nothing, who are making no difference. It is when you stand out, when you move forward, when you produce results, that others begin to notice. And sometimes their noticing takes the form of resentment, jealousy, or fear. Carnegie points out that being attacked, in many cases, simply means you are making progress. He encourages us to reframe criticism as proof of relevance rather than as proof of failure. Instead of asking, "Why are they tearing me down?" we might ask, "What does their criticism reveal about the impact I am having?" When viewed this way, much of the sting begins to fade. The second fundamental is to consider the source. Not all voices carry equal weight, and yet many of us allow harsh words from unqualified or biased individuals to wound us deeply. Carnegie stresses that we must develop the discipline of filtering criticism, asking ourselves who is speaking, what authority they have, what motives might lie behind their words, and whether they truly know enough about us or our situation to make their judgment valid. By learning to weigh the critic instead of automatically absorbing the criticism, we begin to protect our emotional balance. The third fundamental is to look honestly for any grain of truth within the criticism. While unjust attacks may deserve to be ignored, there are times when even hostile or poorly delivered criticism contains a kernel of insight that can help us grow. Carnegie suggests that we adopt a humble posture, willing to examine whether there is something in the critique that we can use constructively, while discarding the rest. This approach transforms criticism from something purely harmful into a potential tool for self-improvement. Instead of reacting defensively, we ask, "Is there anything here I can learn?" The fourth fundamental is to remember that no one ever builds a monument to a critic. The world does not honor those who sit on the sidelines throwing stones. It honors those who strive, who create, who act despite criticism. Carnegie urges us not to let fear of negative words paralyze us, because if we wait until every critic is silenced, we will never move forward. Criticism is part of the cost of achievement, and once you accept it as inevitable, its power to disturb you diminishes. The fifth fundamental is to train yourself not to overreact emotionally to every passing comment. Many people waste enormous energy replaying insults, rehearsing counterarguments, or imagining elaborate responses, when in truth most criticism is forgotten by the critic as quickly as it was spoken. Carnegie advises us to conserve our strength by refusing to magnify minor remarks into major wounds. He reminds us that just as a ship cannot sink unless water is allowed to enter, our spirits cannot be sunk by criticism unless we let it seep into our hearts. The sixth fundamental, perhaps the most liberating of all, is to remember that your worth is not defined by the opinions of others. If you root your sense of value in constant approval, you will always be at the mercy of outside voices. But if you ground your worth in your principles, your efforts, and your integrity, then criticism, fair or unfair, loses much of its power. Carnegie emphasizes that cultivating inner security is the surest shield against worry over criticism. So, when we put these fundamentals together, reframing unjust criticism as a compliment, weighing the source before accepting the words, extracting useful lessons without absorbing the poison, remembering that critics are never the true builders of progress, refusing to overreact emotionally, and anchoring our worth in something deeper than human opinion, we arrive at a mental posture that frees us from the tyranny of criticism. Let us now arrive at part 6. 6 ways to prevent fatigue and worry, and hear the tone of Dale Carnegie's voice, if we could imagine it, would be gentle but firm, because he understood something that modern medicine and psychology both affirm, that worry and fatigue are deeply intertwined, that when the body is weary, The mind becomes more vulnerable to anxiety, irritability, and fear, and that when energy is renewed, clarity and peace follow naturally. I want you to think of this section as a bridge between physical care and mental serenity, because to conquer worry, you must not only train your thoughts, but also guard your body, your rhythms, and your habits of work and rest. The first fundamental is resting before you get tired. Most of us wait until exhaustion forces us to stop, but Carnegie stresses that true wisdom is in anticipating fatigue and giving yourself short periods of rest before you collapse. He compares this principle to the way a machine is maintained. If you let a motor run until it breaks down, repairs are costly, but if you service it regularly, it runs smoothly and lasts longer. Similarly, if you push your body and mind past their limits day after day, worry finds fertile soil in your exhaustion. But if you pause at intervals, even briefly, you prevent weariness from becoming overwhelming. It is not laziness to rest, it is strategy. The second fundamental is learning to relax while you work. Many people approach tasks with tension in their shoulders, tightness in their jaws, and restlessness in their movements, as though effort must always be accompanied by strain. Carnegie teaches the opposite, that you can train your body to work in a relaxed manner, conserving energy and reducing unnecessary fatigue. He suggests that as you type, write, talk, or think, you periodically scan your body for tension and consciously release it. This practice of working with ease not only keeps you physically fresher, but also lowers the emotional agitation that fuels worry. The third fundamental is developing the habit of good posture. This might sound small, but Carnegie explains that the way you carry your body influences the way you feel. A slumped spine, a collapsed chest, and drooping shoulders signal defeat to the mind, draining your vitality, whereas standing tall, sitting upright, and breathing fully help oxygen flow and send a message of alertness and confidence. Posture is not vanity. It is physiology and psychology working together to affect your mood and your energy. When your body supports you, your mind is steadier, and worry finds fewer cracks to slip through. The fourth fundamental is avoiding boredom, because boredom breeds fatigue. We often assume that rest is the opposite of exhaustion, but Carnegie points out that monotony can drain us just as much as overwork. A mind that is disengaged becomes sluggish, and a sluggish mind is prone to worry. He urges us to vary our tasks, to keep our minds stimulated, to add interest to our routines, and to engage with work that challenges us. Fatigue does not always come from too much activity. Sometimes it comes from too little meaningful engagement. The fifth fundamental is protecting your health with good habits. Carnegie stresses that worry often has its roots in physical neglect, lack of exercise, poor diet, insufficient sleep, or ignoring medical issues. He reminds us that the body and mind are not separate kingdoms. They are partners, and when the body is weakened, the mind cannot resist worry as effectively. Caring for your physical well-being is not indulgence, it is armor against anxiety. By nourishing yourself properly, you give your mind the strength it needs to stay calm under pressure. The sixth and final fundamental is working with passion and purpose. Carnegie insists that when you believe in what you are doing, when you are engaged heart and soul in your tasks, fatigue has less power over you, because purpose fuels resilience. He points out that many people feel exhausted not because they have done too much, but because they have done too little that matters to them. When you pour yourself into meaningful work, you draw energy from a deeper well, and worry is often swept aside by the momentum of enthusiasm. These 6 fundamentals, resting before exhaustion, relaxing while working, cultivating good posture, avoiding boredom, protecting health, and working with passion, weave together into a holistic approach to preventing fatigue and, by extension, preventing worry. Carnegie's wisdom here is that peace of mind is not only a mental exercise, but also a physical discipline. If your body is worn down, your mind becomes fragile, But if your body is supported and energized, your mind has the strength to resist unnecessary fears. Part 7. How to find the kind of work in which you may be happy and successful. Dale Carnegie addresses something that lies at the very heart of our human experience: the connection between our daily labor and our long-term peace of mind. Because so much of our worry is not simply about bills or criticism or fatigue, but about the gnawing dissatisfaction of spending our lives in work that drains us rather than sustains us, in tasks that feel meaningless instead of fulfilling, and in careers that never quite align with our natural gifts or deepest values. I want you to hear this part not just as advice about jobs, but as wisdom about life itself, because the work you choose shapes your identity, your energy, your relationships, and your capacity to experience joy. The first fundamental Carnegie lays down is the importance of aligning your work with your natural strengths and genuine interests. He warns that too many people force themselves into careers they dislike out of fear, family pressure, or the pursuit of status, only to find themselves chronically unhappy and perpetually worried. He reminds us that success is not measured merely in money or titles, but in whether the work fits the person. If you are trying to fit into a role that runs against your personality, your talents, or your passions, worry will always stalk you, because every day will feel like a battle against yourself. The key, he says, is to discover what you do with enthusiasm, what you can pour yourself into without resentment, and then build your work around that. The second fundamental is recognizing that dissatisfaction at work infects the rest of life. If you spend 8 or 10 hours a day in misery, you cannot expect to suddenly switch into joy once the workday ends. Carnegie emphasizes that since work occupies the majority of our waking hours, its influence on our overall well-being is enormous. And to ignore that truth is to invite chronic worry and frustration. He is urging us not to treat career choice lightly, but to see it as one of the most consequential decisions for our mental health. The third fundamental is understanding that no work is worry-free, but the right work transforms struggle into satisfaction. Carnegie is realistic. Every profession has difficulties, deadlines, and disappointments. But when your work suits you, the difficulties are challenges rather than torment. He notes that fatigue feels different when it comes from meaningful effort versus meaningless drudgery. One leaves you tired but proud. The other leaves you tired and bitter. The difference is not in the workload, but in the alignment between the task and the soul of the worker. The fourth fundamental is courage. The courage to make changes if you are trapped in work that is slowly destroying you. Carnegie tells stories of individuals who endured years of unhappiness because they were afraid to step out of their rut, afraid to risk change, afraid to seek something better, and he contrasts them with those who dared to redirect their lives, and in doing so found renewed energy and happiness. He acknowledges that change is risky, but he insists that the greater risk is in staying stuck in work that deadens the spirit, because over time, the cost is not only worry but health, relationships, and life itself. The fifth fundamental is the reminder that happiness and success come not only from what you do, but how you do it. Even if circumstances prevent you from immediately changing jobs, Carnegie advises that you can still transform your experience by bringing a new attitude to the work you have. If you approach your tasks with diligence, pride, and creativity, and if you search for ways to connect your work to a broader purpose, you can often discover meaning where there once was monotony. He is teaching us that while external change is ideal, internal change is powerful too. And finally, the sixth fundamental is to see work as a service to others, not merely as a means of income. When you shift from thinking of your job as just a way to earn money to seeing it as a way to contribute, to solve problems, to improve lives, the weight of worry often lifts. Service infuses even ordinary labor with dignity, and dignity breeds satisfaction. So the lesson of this part is profound. Worry in life is often a symptom of misaligned work, of time and energy poured into tasks that do not fit the self. But when you discover or create work that suits your strengths, aligns with your values, and serves others, worry no longer dominates your days. Instead, you find yourself tired but fulfilled, stretched but satisfied, challenged yet at peace. Now, dear listener, we come at last to the conclusion of Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And this is not simply the closing of a book, but the gathering together of many threads of wisdom into a single tapestry of understanding. Because Carnegie did not write these pages as theory alone, but as a practical guide forged through real human stories. Through observation of thousands of men and women weighed down by anxiety, and through his own determination to show us that life can be lived with more serenity, more strength, and more joy if only we learn the fundamentals of mastering worry. The first great fundamental that echoes through the entire book is living in day-tight compartments. Carnegie teaches us that life becomes unbearable when we drag the mistakes of yesterday and the fears of tomorrow into the present moment. The cure is not denial, but focus, the art of shutting the iron doors on the past and the future and giving our full energy to the present day. When you discipline yourself to live this way, worry begins to lose its grip, because worry thrives on uncertainty about the future and regret about the past, never on the task right in front of you. The second fundamental that carries through the book is analyzing worry with clarity instead of emotion. Carnegie repeatedly urges us to ask 3 questions. What is the worst that can possibly happen? How likely is it? And if it did happen, how could I handle it? This method strips worry of its exaggerated power. By facing the worst calmly, accepting it if necessary, and then working to improve upon it, you transform worry from a cloud of dread into a challenge that can be managed. The third fundamental is breaking the worry habit before it breaks you. This means cultivating practices that replace nervous energy with constructive action. Keeping busy so the mind has no room for idle fears, refusing to stew over trifles, and remembering that most things we worry about never come to pass. By making these habits part of your daily rhythm, you starve worry of the attention it feeds upon. The fourth fundamental is developing a mental attitude that breeds peace instead of agitation. Carnegie shares practical ways to train your mind toward gratitude, tolerance, forgiveness, and optimism, reminding us that our thoughts shape our reality. If we dwell on injuries, criticisms, or injustices, worry multiplies. If we focus on blessings, opportunities, and kindness, worry shrinks. The mental atmosphere we create for ourselves determines whether our inner life is stormy or calm. The fifth fundamental is learning to handle criticism wisely. Carnegie shows us that criticism is unavoidable, but it need not be destructive. When we view unjust criticism as a backhanded compliment, when we weigh the source instead of absorbing every word, and when we extract only the lessons that are useful, we free ourselves from the constant fear of others' opinions. To worry less about criticism is to reclaim our inner independence. The sixth fundamental is guarding the body against fatigue, because fatigue breeds worry. Here, Carnegie reminds us that the mind cannot resist anxiety when the body is run down. Resting before exhaustion, working with relaxation, keeping good posture, avoiding boredom, and nourishing our health all act as shields against worry. A rested body sustains a rested mind, and together they create resilience. The seventh and final fundamental is finding work that brings both happiness and success. Since much of our life is spent in labor, dissatisfaction at work spills over into every other corner of life. To reduce worry, we must seek alignment. Work that matches our strengths, interests, and values. Work that feels purposeful rather than meaningless. When our days are filled with tasks that engage us, even challenges become sources of satisfaction rather than worry. So, when we stand back and look at these principles together, we see a full philosophy of living. Protect the present, analyze clearly, act constructively, cultivate gratitude, detach from unfair criticism, safeguard your body, and pursue meaningful work. Each is a thread, but woven together they create a net strong enough to catch worry before it can consume us. If you have liked this audiobook, then show your love by hitting the like and share button. And if you want more audiobook explanation like this, then don't forget to subscribe Cliff Note Chronicles.